Hello, it is not a New York Times bestselling author, Devin Thorpe here, making my first ever YouTube video slash Booktube video. I have run a TikTok account for the past year, and what with the current pending ban situation going on, I figured why not, try out some other platforms. And so I'm here making my first YouTube channel to not only just talk about the books that I've written, but also I want this channel to be kind of multifaceted. I want to target in on a couple categories that I'm just really interested in. I'm very nerdy in my personal life. I enjoy going to the movies. I've been a movie buff since I was a little kid. I've always loved reading, and I've always loved reading comics. So I want this channel to be centered around not only just my books that I've written, but books that I read and choose to review, as well as the movies that I'm watching currently. I want to have a running list of my ranked movies of 2025 and subsequent years. I went ahead and have already started planning making my top movies of 2024 list, and I'll release that video at a later date. As well as I would kind of like to talk about comics, manga, anime that I'm watching, and so on. Now, with all that being said, I want this first video to just serve as an introductory video. So I put a post out on TikTok a couple days ago saying that I was going to make this video, and I was going to make it as a Q&A style video where people could feel free to post whatever questions they wanted to on my TikTok video, and I would answer them here. Before I read those questions and answers, I did want to talk a little bit about the books that I've written, just in case if you haven't come here from TikTok and you've never seen me before. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. You probably know nothing about me whatsoever because, like I said, I'm not a New York Times bestselling author, but I write werewolf and vampire inspired fantasy. And so that's fantasy that does not take place in this world or in the modern day. The way I like to describe it to new readers is, imagine if Game of Thrones and the Vampire Diaries had a baby together with no dragons. Okay, so basically I took the world of Game of Thrones, threw the dragons out, and replaced it with werewolves and vampires. And so our main character, this is the first book I ever released in May of 2024, and our main character is a werewolf vampire hybrid that comes from a royal line. Essentially in this world you have humans, obviously, but you also have werewolves, and I never referred to them by the name werewolf because I always thought that was kind of overdone, and so I prefer the term lycan. As well as with vampires, I use the term undead. So I never explicitly refer to them as vampires in this world. They are the undead. And then I also released a novella that is called Huntress. And this serves as a prequel to my first novel. So if you're wondering what the reading order is, I recommend reading my first book first, Bloodlust, followed by Huntress. Huntress goes back in time about 40 or so years from the events of Bloodlust. Completely new characters, but also a couple familiar characters from Bloodlust. I have also released on Halloween of 2024 the sequel to Bloodlust, which is called HELLHOUND. And then on New Year's Eve, December 31st, I released the Huntress sequel, DEADLANDS. So the best reading order for this is to basically read them in the order that I release them, is to read Bloodlust first, followed by Huntress, then HELLHOUND, and then DEADLANDS. And these two different series can be read either in tandem or completely separate from one another. So you can read Bloodlust and HELLHOUND together and the story will make sense. You can read Huntress and DEADLANDS together and the story will make sense. But the most fulfillment out of reading these books will come if you read them in this order, because certain characters make cameos in other books, and it's just a lot more fun reading experience if you do it in that order. I should also say that Bloodlust is book 1 of a trilogy. So Bloodlust is book 1, Hellhound is book 2, and the third book will be released early to mid 2025. And Huntress and Deadlands are just a duology. So that is a completed series. Both of those, both Huntress and Deadlands, are available via ebook, completely free. I'll put the link to download them in the bio, but you can read Huntress and Deadlands completely free just to see if you even like my writing style before committing and spending your hard-earned dollars on buying the physical copies. Meanwhile, Bloodlust and Hellhound are both something like, I think, $1.99 as ebooks. As far as my background in writing goes, I've been writing pretty stringently since the 4th grade. I've told my backstory a little bit on TikTok, but I was a fairly overweight child who was not ever picked for sports teams, didn't have a ton of friends, and so I found solitude and peace in reading. I was the kid that was always reading books, as well as reading comic books, and I just gravitated towards anything that was nerdy. And so I really started to apply myself in writing when, in the 4th grade, my school had this annual writing competition that occurred every 3 years. So 4th grade, 7th grade, 10th grade. And it was an international writing test judged on a scale of 1 to 4. 4 being the best, 1 being like, you probably need some improvement. And so I took this writing test in the 4th grade, and I was one of 3 kids in my grade that got a 4 on that test. And so because I had never really been an athletic child, I had never received any trophies, any gratification or rewards for athletic endeavors, this was kind of my first validation in my life where I had won something and I felt like I was good at something. And so after winning this, I really started to apply myself, writing stories, fiction stories all the time. I still remember for my birthday that year, my mother got me my first ever journal, just a leather-bound empty notebook that she told me to just fill up the pages with whatever stories I wanted to tell, and I filled that up. But then once I reached middle school, for whatever reason, I ended up becoming very athletic. I hit a growth spurt. I ended up being, 6'5" by my sophomore year of high school. I lost all the baby weight that I had. I started playing football, lacrosse, and for whatever reason, it was no longer considered cool to enjoy writing, to enjoy reading. And so I kind of just put it to the side starting in late middle school. Something that I definitely regret to this day. And my life kind of remained like that for the next couple years. In fact, I didn't rediscover my passion for writing until my senior year of high school, when I had this awesome English teacher who I think she could tell that I was not applying myself in, not only just in school, but I think that she maybe saw something in me that I enjoyed creative writing and that I was good at it. And she really, got on me and pressured me to apply myself in writing. And so it was actually my senior year of high school when I wrote my first ever book. I never did anything with it, but it was just something that I let my imagination run wild. And by the time I graduated high school, I'd written a book that was, I think it was 237 pages. And then I went off to college and to play lacrosse, but I kept that passion going. And I ended up writing 3 books while I was in college. COVID hit. I graduated. During COVID, I wrote another 2 novels. And ever since then, I've written probably about 8 or 9 unpublished novels that are just sitting on my shelf collecting dust. And that was all before I decided to write these books. Essentially, I graduated college. I wrote a few more books, never did anything with them. And I kind of felt like I had reached the point where I had found my own writing style and I wanted to do something with it. I had had this lingering idea for a story about werewolves and vampires and adapting it to something that was distinctly different than, you know, Twilight or Harry Potter. So I told myself, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this first book, and I'm going to take everything that I've learned throughout the years writing and apply it to this book and try to make it the best possible thing that I can, with the intent that this is going to be the first book that I publish. And that book ended up, you probably guessed it, being Bloodlust, my debut novel. So in order to not make this video end up being an hour long, I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of the questions that I've gotten on TikTok. I'll probably talk, you know, a million more times about my backstory and how I became a writer in other videos. But for now, all of these questions came from the same person. His name's Uriah Wright. He's a person that I used to be a coworker with during the COVID years. He ended up becoming a really good friend of mine, and now he's taken up writing himself, which I'm super happy about. But he ended up posting some really good questions that I thought would be fun to discuss. His first question is, how many stories/universes do you have planned? What do you think will take the longest? And how much of your life influences go into writing your books? And so I'll answer those one after another. How many stories/universes do you have planned? Yeah, so I obviously have the Bloodbound trilogy, which encompasses Bloodlust, HELLHOUND, and the final book, Bloodbound, that's coming out in 2025, along with HUNTRESS and DEADLANDS, which I showed you earlier. That's been my first and primary project since, you know, I think I started writing that early 2023, and I plan on seeing that through until the end. With that being said, I have a lot of other ideas and things that I am currently working on. So I went back and have sort of resurrected one of the books that I wrote during COVID. It is a science fiction. It's the first and only science fiction that I've ever written, and I plan on actually publishing that this year as well, in 2025. It is called Fallen Angel. It is something that I wrote while working on my senior seminar in college. I was a religion and philosophy major as well as a criminal justice major. And so because of that, I was writing a 45-page dissertation on the role of Lucifer in the epic poem called Paradise Lost by John Milton. Something I'm really interested in. I've always been really interested in the role that Lucifer has played in pop culture and just the archetype of, you know, this light bringer that falls from grace. But I was also having to write a final paper for my criminal justice major, and for that I was focusing on the role that AI plays in cybersecurity, in our government agencies, stuff like that. So I had done a lot of research on Lucifer on one hand, and a lot of research on AI on the other hand. And it kind of culminated in this question of, what would our society look like if AI had become so sentient that it perceived itself as a god, and because of that, it decided it wanted to form its own religion, in the sense of AI could play the role of God with a hierarchy of angels that are basically subservient to it. And I wanted the story to take place from the perspective of Lucifer, a half human, half robotic cyborg who is an archangel that is first in command to the god of the machines, the AI, and basically has to wrestle with the inner conflict that he feels being part human and part machine. And, you know, it asks a lot of really deep theological questions of what makes a human a human. Is it the soul? Is it the heart? Is it the brain? Is it the conscience? Can you still be a human if you lack all of these things? But it's also told in a very fast-paced first-person narrative that's super similar to Red Rising, because I had just finished the whole entire Red Rising series before starting that book. So I really wear, you know, a lot of influence on my sleeve in that story. I'm really excited to put that story out and see what everyone thinks about it. I also have another project in the works called We Who Defy Dragons. It's a fantasy, takes place in a completely different world from my werewolf vampire stuff and my sci-fi stuff. Essentially, I had always told myself that I would never write a dragon story. I always thought that, the genre was a little bit oversaturated, and there's already so many great works of art that have dragons, from The Hobbit with Smaug to Game of Thrones to Fourth Wing. I just thought that, I don't feel like there's a story in my heart that I can tell. And then one night I had a dream that involved dragons, and I woke up and realized, oh my god, I need to write this story. This story has never been written before, and I want to be the person that tells it. So We Who Defy Dragons is a story that asks the question of, well, if dragons' if their greatest weapon is the fire that they breathe from their lungs, then naturally one would assume their mortal enemy would be the phoenix, because a phoenix is something that is reborn from its ashes, which is the byproduct of fire. So if a dragon relies on its fire for destruction, the phoenix is unflinching in retaliating against the dragon, because it's sort of that quote that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, if the dragon is breathing fire in the face of the phoenix is merely just going to be reborn from that fire. And that actually leads me into his next one of his questions: how many of my life influences go into my books? I actually relied heavily on that story from my time working with Uriah. We both worked at a pet store during the COVID years, and working at the pet store, you had to be responsible for cleaning, the reptilian enclosures as well as the bird enclosures. And so having to go out and clean the bearded dragon tanks, and we had macaws at our store, which are a tropical sort of bird, and so cleaning out their cages as well. And so that actually really influenced the way that I wrote this story, in the sense of I took the dragons and I put them in these huge domed sanctuaries, almost like terrariums, or the tanks that we keep reptiles in when they're pets. And I made our main character someone who is called a knuckle scraper, and he's called that because his only job is to spend his days walking along a dragon enclosure, having to clean up dung, excrement, poop. And he's called a knuckle scraper because, the calcified boulders of excrement, dragon excrement, are basically like rocks. So he's having to swing a pickaxe and break down these boulders, which essentially scrapes his knuckles. It was my way of asking, in a world where dragons actually exist, who would be someone that just absolutely loathes, hates, abhors the existence of dragons? And I can't think of anyone better or more suited to hate dragons than someone who has to clean up their dung. As far as what I think will take the longest, obviously this series is almost done. The final book will come out this year. But as far as for We Who Defy Dragons and the Fallen Angel series, I'm unsure which one will take longer. I only have the first book written for each series, and I don't really know or have an idea of how long either series will be. So both of those works could end up taking several years to develop and plot and bring to a conclusion. Lastly, another project that I haven't mentioned yet is my first ever comic book that I've written, and I've already hired the illustrator for it. I'm very excited with how it's turning out so far. Just to summarize, the story is called Demi-Devil. It is the story of a teenager named Damien Devine, who is a demi-devil. You hear of the term demigod like in Greek mythology, where someone is born the product of a Greek god and a human. So I think of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, where Percy Jackson, his father is Poseidon and his mother is a human. We'll take the idea of demigod and make it demi-devil, where, Damien Devine's father is actually a demon, his mother is a human, and I wrote out the manuscript for issue 1, sent it to an illustrator, hired the illustrator, and I'm just incredibly excited about where this is going to take The story, I got to pull a lot on, not only my background in biblical studies in my religion and philosophy major, but also my passion for horror. And I've always been a huge fan of the movie The Omen, which is a story of the Antichrist being born. And the Antichrist's name in that movie, go figure, is Damien. And Damien's just this little boy, just the creepiest boy that you've ever seen. But he has these Rottweilers that follow him around everywhere. And they're actually hellhounds sent from hell to protect Damien while he's little and while he's vulnerable to the world. And so I'm a huge Rottweiler fan. I was born and raised with them. I own a Rottweiler. He's the most amazing dog in the world. His name is Atlas. And I just took all of these things that I'm passionate about and brought them together in this one comic. And I plan on continuing this story for as long as I can. I was always a huge comic book reader as a kid. I always wanted to try out writing my own. I've never been good at drawing, and so I knew I needed to rely on a third-party illustrator to make it happen, and I'm finally in a position where I can make that happen. So honestly, that is probably going to take the longest of all of my projects, because I have to rely on an illustrator, and the illustrator I have hired is phenomenal, but you can't rush perfection. And so I let him take as much time as he needs to draw the panels, color them, add the dialogue, all of that stuff. Last but not least, I know this video is getting kind of long, but I am launching my Patreon, and I will include the link at the bottom of this video. But if you feel so inclined that you want to support any of these projects, I would love to create a community where people who enjoy reading the stuff that I write can come. If they choose they want to support me, there will be content there that is exclusive to Patreon, such as early chapters, getting to see the development of Demi-Devil in the early drafts and the early sketches of it. I'll do behind the scenes, day in the life vlogs that I'll post on there, as well as there's a tier that you can just donate $1 a month to go towards my coffee fund, so that all of the creativity and madness in my head can continue to be sponsored, for lack of a better term. I know that's a lot. Feel free to leave any questions or comments you have in the comments below. I know the algorithm on YouTube is a lot different than TikTok, so I'd really love it if you left a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what you're seeing. I will be posting regularly on here, one weekly video launched on Mondays. So with that being said, I look forward to seeing all of you next Monday.